Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. If you'd like to support my channel, please check out the link above to my Patreon page. So I'm finally back from my vacation. I was gone all of August, and I've just been really excited to get back home, start playing more Magic again, start uploading videos for you guys again. While I was away on vacation, I watched Gabriel Nassif stream Bant Soulherder, which is kind of a new deck in Modern. Nassif himself didn't come up with the idea. The way he tells the story is that he played against somebody on Magic Online who was trying a brew that took advantage of Soulherder, and it really caught Nassif's attention, and he made a few adjustments and started playing the deck a lot. He actually, a little over a week ago, took it to a second place finish in the Modern Challenge. For those of you guys who don't know about the Modern Challenges, it's a tournament that happens every Saturday on Magic Online. It's 8 rounds and then cut to a top 8. It draws a couple hundred players, and it's pretty much the spikiest of the spikes online play in this tournament. And the fact that Nassif took it all the way to the finals, and actually only lost because he ran out of time. He's an extremely deliberate player, and this deck has a lot of triggers, and he didn't really respect the fact that he could potentially lose on time. He won the first game, if I recall correctly, pretty easily, and then he timed out before even finishing the second game of the match. So pretty silly way to lose. But just the fact that he got to second place with a deck that is in its earliest developmental stages speaks to the power level of the deck and the potential of the deck. For me, what captured my attention was just how fun the deck looked to play. It's a bit complicated, so it encourages extremely careful play. And for that reason, I think it would really appeal to other Merfolk players. The deck has a bunch of similarities to how Merfolk plays. It's got Force of Negation, because it does run a bunch of blue cards, so it can afford to take advantage of Force of Negation's alternative casting cost. And, it runs a bunch of little 2-drop creatures like Coiling Oracle and Icefang Codal that aren't going to really win in combat by themselves. The same way that with Merfolk, you're not really going to win a game with just a Silvergill. You need to build sort of a strategically sized army without overcommitting to the board, cast a counterspell here, a counterspell there, and somehow get there. These are the kind of decks that capture my attention. I'm sure that you guys, as subscribers of my channel, also appreciate this kind of dynamic, interactive, decision-intensive Magic, and that's exactly what Soulherder is as a deck. So it's not Merfolk content, but I think it would appeal to you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a bit of a deck tech today with Bant Soulherder in Modern. I've got about 50 matches under my belt at this point, which is actually quite a lot. I've made many tweaks as I've gone along, making adjustments to the main deck, adjustments to the mana, adjustments to the sideboard. I sort of know which cards are the most powerful in the deck, and what are the more flex slots that we can afford to swap out with other cards if the meta changes, or if it just seems to synergize better with what the deck is doing in general. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into Bant Soulherder. We'll start with the namesake card, Soulherder. This is from Modern Horizons, and if you check it out, there's actually a ton of cards from Modern Horizons in this deck. You've got Coiling Oracle, a reprint here from Modern Horizons. You've got Icefang Codal. You've got Force of Negation, just a lot. Soulherder, a whole bunch of cards from that set. And a lot of them are just, there's a common, there's an uncommon. So kind of neat that this deck takes advantage of so many of these cards. But anyhow, Soulherder, Modern Horizon card. It's a 3-drop, 1/1. Seems like pretty dorky on its face. It's got this stunning art by Seb McKinnon that I was just floored by when I saw it at first. I was a little disappointed by the text on the card. It was an uncommon. I thought it seemed kind of cute. I've seen a bunch of Blink decks in Modern in the past, and they're super fringe, not even like tier 3. And I thought this card would see 0 play. So when I saw that Nassif was actually having good results with it, and the fact that a Hall of Fame player thinks that this card has legs, was enough for me. Like, I was all in. I was like, all right, the card is beautiful, super fun, let's do it. So let's check out the 2 abilities. The first one says, whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Soulherder. The second ability says, at the beginning of your end step, you may exile another target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So let's dissect the first ability a little bit. Whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Soulherder. Now, it doesn't say whenever a creature is exiled by Soulherder. It says whenever a creature is exiled. So you have to think, what are some ways that creatures can be exiled from the battlefield? Well, you've got, of course, Path to Exile. If a creature is exiled with Path to Exile, Soulherder gets bigger. You have things like Detention Sphere. If a bunch of creatures get exiled by Detention Sphere, say 3 creatures get exiled by a Detention Sphere, Soulherder gets 3 +1/+1 counters. If somebody has a Leyline of the Void out, and a creature dies but goes to exile instead of to the graveyard, Soulherder gets bigger. So there's a lot of ways that this card can get bigger and bigger. In some games, it easily gets above like a 10/10. It can add up very quickly because there's so many different ways to get exile effects in the game. And a lot of them are not really obvious at first. And you come to understand how many ways there are as you play the deck more and more. So it's really flexible. He grows faster than you might expect him to grow. So that's the first ability. The second ability says, at the beginning of your end step, exile another target creature you control. So this is sort of the main way that Soulherder gets power. It's the biggest strength of the card is it encourages you to run lots of other, pretty much exclusively only enter the battlefield ability creatures. So on the low end, you've got Coiling Oracle, Icefang Kotal that draw cards. They put lands onto the battlefield. Eternal Witness, extremely powerful, getting back whatever you need from your graveyard. And then you can take your pick. Knight of Autumn is like a Swiss Army knife, does a lot of different stuff. If you need to gain life, if you need to destroy artifacts, just blink them with Soulherder. It gets the job done. And while you're doing all that, getting all that value, Soulherder is just growing into a huge threat. So it can be pretty difficult for an opponent to know exactly which creature they should kill and exactly the timing, because often opponents will wait till the end step to do something. So if I go to the end step, my end step, Soulherder's gonna get a trigger. So imagine a situation where turn 2, I play a Coiling Oracle, turn 3, I play a Soulherder, and just pass, and well, after attacking maybe. So I just pass, the opponent's like, okay, I'm gonna kill one of his creatures on end step, but I get a Soulherder trigger. Clearly the opponent wants to kill the Soulherder since it's the engine card, it's the 3-drop, but if Soulherder is targeting Coiling Oracle, the trigger is already on the stack on the end step. If the opponent then kills Soulherder, I still get value from blinking Coiling Oracle. If the opponent lets the trigger go on the stack and then they kill the Soulherder, I get value. If instead they try to keep me from getting value by killing the Coiling Oracle in response to Soulherder's trigger, then I've still got my engine card on the battlefield. I can play out any of my ETB creatures on the next turn, start blinking them, start getting value. So it can be very tricky for opponents to know how to play optimally against this card since the triggers happen all the time and at sort of very particular times. All right, so that's the engine card. I think you guys sort of get it at this point. There is another extremely important card, potentially the most powerful card in this deck. And it's funny because it's another common. It's from Modern Horizons. It's Ephemerate. This card is 1 white. It's an instant, and it's got Rebound, which means that if you cast it, then at your next, it exiles when it resolves, and then at the beginning of your next upkeep, you can cast it again from exile. So basically, you get to cast this spell twice. And so what does it do? It exiles a target creature you control, and then immediately returns it to the battlefield. So just on its face, the most basic way to use it is if the opponent's tapped out, you've got a Coiling Oracle on the battlefield, cast Ephemerate, bounce the Coiling Oracle, get another enter the battlefield trigger, draw a card, or put a land onto the battlefield with Coiling Oracle. Then, during your next upkeep, you'll cast Ephemerate again, on another creature. Could be the same Oracle. It could be whatever you want, whatever you have on the battlefield. So just in conjunction with something like a Coiling Oracle or an Icefang Codal, Ephemerate basically reads, pay 1 white, draw 2 cards. It's pretty wild. It's almost like Ancestral Recall, which is one of the most busted cards ever made in Magic. And this is a common, again, so it's... It might seem weird that I'm saying it's like the most powerful card in this deck as a common, as a 1-drop, but it's just insane. The value can get so out of control. Again, with Knight of Autumn, if you're playing against an artifact deck, you play Knight of Autumn, blow up an artifact. Play Ephemerate, blink the Knight, blow up another artifact. Next upkeep, cast the Rebound with Ephemerate, target Knight of Autumn, blow up another artifact. So you can just lock opponents out of the game with simple loops like that. Or against Burn, you just gain 12 life. Blink Eternal Witness, get back Force of Negation, and just repeat it on your end step. Your upkeep. Keep getting back forces. It's extremely powerful. It's basically a complement to Soulherder. It's another way to blink creatures. And you want to draw as many Ephemerates as you can in general. Next up, we've got Path to Exile. I believe I mentioned this as a way that creatures can get exiled from the battlefield. Even when your opponent's creatures get exiled, the Soulherder gets bigger. So opponent plays a threat, you exile it, Soulherder's growing. So there's some sweet synergy between the best white removal in the format and our engine card, which is just really gravy, right? We would probably play Path to Exile in this deck, even if it didn't have that synergy. But it does, and it really comes in pretty handy. Next up is Noble Hierarch, and this is a relatively recent tweak to the deck. For the first week or so of development on Nassif's stream, week or two, I guess, there were no mana dorks. The thought was we just want to maximize our 2-drop value creatures. You had Wall of Blossoms, Wall of Omens, on top of Coiling Oracle and Icefang Codal. So I'm going to pull some of those cards up. I'm going to be a little bit expansive with this deck tech. So if you guys want to put it on double speed, go for it. But I want to make sure you guys understand that some of the choices involved in this deck and just sort of everything that I know about it, because I think it's super sweet. And I just want to share all this stuff with you guys. So Wall of Blossoms was in the deck. Another option was, of course, Wall of Omens, also in the Bant colors, basically a white version of Wall of Blossoms. And the thought with these walls, of course, is draw a card, blink them, draw more cards. But one of the weaknesses of this deck is sort of go wide, super fast aggro decks like Goblins, Affinity, Elves, that kind of thing. And maybe even Burn with Goblin Guides, things like that. And the walls just kind of slow them down. They get us, further along in the game. If we can, block their attackers, we get to turn 4, turn 5, start getting tons and tons of value with our Enter the Battlefield abilities. But something I was always sort of unhappy with about these walls is that there's not a blue Wall of Blossoms or Wall of Omens. There's only green and white walls that draw a card when they enter the battlefield. And the deck really wants a certain density of blue cards to be able to pitch for Force of Negation. You don't really want to get into a position in a game where you have to decide between playing the best spell, which might be your blue card, like Coiling Oracle, if it's your only other blue card in hand. Maybe Detention, Deputy of Detention needs to exile an important combo piece on the opponent's board, but that would leave you tapped out with no way to play Force of Negation. We want more blue cards in the deck if possible. And to that end, a lot of people were testing Watcher for Tomorrow. So this is a blue card, clearly. It's got Hideaway, which lets you look at the top 4 cards, exile 1 under him, and then when Watcher leaves the battlefield, you get that card. I think it was some pro on Twitter likened Watcher for Tomorrow. With Watcher for Tomorrow on the board, he likened Ephemerate to Dig Through Time for 1 white. Basically, you get to look through 8 cards in your library and draw 2 of them. It's a very powerful combination. The drawback of Watcher for Tomorrow is that it enters the battlefield tapped. And so it doesn't it doesn't help against these really explosive, aggressive starts. So Gabriel Nassif was sort of down on this card. I believe he's running, maybe a singleton at this point. He has been trending towards keeping sort of a really high density of 2-drop creatures, whereas I've been moving in a different direction. He had been testing Remand, which seemed like an excellent idea to me, and so I've actually got 3 in my list in place of these walls. So Remand is basically, in my list, the theory is that it's a blue wall. It's an instant speed blue wall. You cast it, it counters anything, maybe like a Reality Smasher, can counter whatever. Walking Ballistic can counter creatures, can counter spells, whatever. It goes to the graveyard. You can recur it with Eternal Witness, cast Ephemerate on Eternal Witness, keep looping Remand. So you can keep countering that Reality Smasher, keep drawing a card. Counter, draw. You're getting value. Your opponent's not really doing much of anything. So similar to the walls where it's generating recurring card draw value, Remand is similar. It's just coming. It's got to get recursion from the graveyard. But I've really enjoyed having it as an extra card to be able to pitch to Force of Negation. So yeah, Remand, pretty strong in the deck. In Merfolk, you guys know it's not always the best choice. We don't really have any way to recur it to get it back from the graveyard like this deck does. But with loops, with Eternal Witness and Ephemerate, Remand is actually quite strong. So it's been doing very well, and so running 3 of them. On to the next cards. I've talked about these a little bit already. Don't need to dwell on them here. Coiling Oracle as a really cool ability. You reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, it goes straight to the battlefield. Like if it's a shock, you get the choice. Do you want to pay life and have it enter untapped? It doesn't enter tapped necessarily. You get a fetch land, you can crack it right away. They enter untapped, which is awesome. It's a really powerful spell on turn 2. If it ramps you, you can untap on turn 3 with 4 mana. You can cast Soulherder and then leave up mana to cast Ephemerate. If the opponent tries to remove the Soulherder, you can blink the creature with Ephemerate. So yeah, Coiling Oracle, it ramps us, it draws us cards. If it's not a land, it just goes into your hand. Now the drawback here is that you're revealing the card. So if the top card of your library is a Force of Negation, the opponent sees it, but it goes into your hand. So, a slight drawback, sort of like Goblin Guide. It lets the opponent know what you're drawing there. So Icefang Codal, similar. It draws a card when it enters the battlefield. It's got Flash, which is pretty fun, and it has Death Touch if you control at least 3 other snow permanents, which is why we're running these snow basics. If Icefang Codal is important in a given matchup, like if they have big, powerful flyers, you're going to want to prioritize getting your snow basics out onto the battlefield so that Icefang Codal will have Death Touch. Now, something I mentioned a moment ago is the idea of using Ephemerate as sort of a counter spell. If an opponent goes to Lightning Bolt one of your creatures, you can respond by casting Ephemerate. It'll blink the creature and save it from the Lightning Bolt. You'll also get value when the creature comes back from Ephemerate, enters the battlefield again, and draws another card, gets a card from the graveyard. Whatever you need to do, whatever your creature does when it enters the battlefield, it happens again with Ephemerate. So when Ephemerate does act like a counterspell for removal like that, it's sort of at its best because, pardon me, a counterspell against a counterspell is a 1-for-1. So this is basically a 1-drop counterspell for the piece of removal the opponent cast, but then you draw a card off of it, and it's a hard counter for the removal, so it's a 2-for-1 in that situation, but then you get to cast Ephemerate again on your upkeep, so it's a 3-for-1 in that situation. Sorry, I had to drink water. Just another example of, to explain why Ephemerate is probably the most powerful card in this deck. When it functions as a counterspell, it just gets that next level value, and it's just pretty insane. So, continuing, I guess I'll go to Eternal Witness next, because it's probably our most important 3-drop apart from Soulherder. But I'm going to take another sip of water. 1 second. All right. So, Eternal Witness. Classic card. Super powerful, been played in a bunch of modern decks, but probably never in a deck that abuses it quite as hard as Soulherder does. I've mentioned a couple times the idea of a loop with with Ephemerate. So I've got a tickle in my throat. Hopefully it just goes away. How does the loop with Ephemerate work? Well, if you cast Ephemerate on Eternal Witness, it blinks the Eternal Witness, and then Ephemerate goes into exile temporarily. So when Eternal Witness gets blinked, you get back whatever you want to get back. It's probably the reason you're casting Eternal Witness. You're playing against a creature deck. You need to get back Path to Exile. So you blink it with Ephemerate. Cast Eternal Witness, get back Path to Exile, right? Cast the Path to Exile, exile one of their creatures, cast Ephemerate, blink Eternal Witness, get back that Path to Exile. Exile another creature. Now, it's your upkeep on the following turn. Ephemerate will rebound, come back from exile, and you get to cast it again. You cast it targeting Eternal Witness. It's going to blink Eternal Witness, and then it goes to the graveyard because Ephemerate is done with its rebound ability. So then when Eternal Witness re-enters the battlefield, Ephemerate can now be targeted in the graveyard, and you can get it back, and that starts the loop because then you cast it and target Eternal Witness again. It goes into exile. You can grab another card from the graveyard with Eternal Witness. Maybe you just want to keep looping Path to Exile. You cast Path to Exile, go to the opponent's turn, back to your upkeep, Ephemerate rebounds, you target Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness gets the Ephemerate back, cast Ephemerate again, target Eternal Witness, get back Path to Exile. And it just loops. If you're playing against Tron, you're going to loop Force of Negation. If you're playing against Burn, you're going to loop Night of Autumn. If you're playing against some kind of go-wide creature deck, you might want to just keep blinking or looping Blade Splicer with Eternal Witness and Ephemerate. So just a really, really powerful interaction or synergy between Eternal Witness and Ephemerate. So Eternal Witness is at a 3 of in the deck because 4 is just a bit too many. Unless you have really great value in the graveyard, Eternal Witness not the best. So you don't want like early game to be loaded up with 2 or 3 Eternal Witnesses. It's just not the best card early in the game. So 3 is pretty much the sweet spot. Next up, I guess we can go back over here to Blade Splicer. This is a card that it's not played in the majority of Soulherder lists. It's not being played by Gabriel Nassif, but I noticed that one of the weaknesses of the deck is that all of its creatures are kind of 1/1s or 2/1s or 1/3s. You know, they have only 1 or 2 power. It can be quite difficult to attack for lethal and close out games. So Blade Splicer, 3 mana, enters the battlefield, makes a 3/3 golem with first strike. If you cast Ephemerate on this, it's going to create another 3/3, and then on your upkeep, it's going to make another 3/3. So that's 3 mana for Blade Splicer, 1 mana for Ephemerate, 4 mana total for 3 first striking 3/3s. Let me say that again. 4 mana for 9 first strike power. It's pretty incredible. And then if you've got Soulherder on the battlefield, every end step, you can blink Blade Splicer, get another 3/3. It can go wide super duper quick. I was really impressed with it when I first started testing it, and I went up from 1 copy to 2 copies, and it's a flex slot. It could get replaced, but as I've been saying, I've just been quite impressed by it. In one of my early matchups with testing it, I played against Burn, which it could be a pretty difficult matchup for us playing Soulherder, and I played a turn 1 Hierarch, a turn 2 Blade Splicer, and they had kept 1 land. They had a Goblin Guide, and I think they bolted the Golem, the 3/3, and then on my turn I just ephemerated the Blade Splicer, made another 3/3, and the opponent just scooped. So a turn 3 concession from Burn. And I don't know, it just helps against tons of decks. Like, 3/3 first strike against Jund, pretty good. Just only have good things to say about Blade Splicer. Never really unhappy to draw it. Next up, Force of Negation, not much to say about it. Any deck that can play this comfortably should be playing it. It's one of the most powerful cards in Modern. It approaches the power level of Force of Will. It doesn't quite get there, but the fact that you can even compare them means that if you're on blue, if you've got a bunch of blue spells in your deck, you should probably run some number of Force of Negations. You could probably disagree with that statement, but it's probably not too far off the mark. Let's go ahead. Deputy of Detention. This is a card that exiles things, so not just creatures. You can target whatever you want. So if you're playing against Ad Nauseam, you can exile Phyrexian Unlife. If you're playing against Control, you can exile a Planeswalker. It exiles what you need to exile. And when it exiles a creature, of course, Soulherder gets bigger. So there's that nice synergy between the two of them. Deputy exiles multiples. So if an opponent has, like I played against a red-green deck that played 3 Wall of Roots, and I exiled all 3 of them with 1 Deputy of Detention. If the opponent then plays something more valuable, you can always blink the Deputy of Detention with Ephemerate or Soulherder, and then when it enters the battlefield again, you can exile that other important thing. So just a strong enter the battlefield ability. It's another way that you can add +1 counters by exiling creatures. And the last piece in my main deck over here is Knight of Autumn. So Knight of Autumn and Blade Splicer are definitely the most flex creatures in the deck here. They are not blue. They can't pitch the force, so they have to pull a lot of weight sort of to earn their spot in the deck. And both of them do that. Knight of Autumn is so super flexible. Its worst mode is just being a 4/3, which, as I mentioned, is really important in a deck that just has 1/1s. We sometimes just need a big creature either to block or to start attacking and trying to actually win the game. If our opponent just keeps removing Soulherders because they grow too big, all we're going to be left with is little guys, play a Knight of Autumn, have it enter as a 4/3, and start attacking. And again, that's its worst mode. Its most important ones most important singular is destroy artifact or enchantment. So people are playing tons and tons of Stoneforge Mystic right now. Lots of equipment. Urza combo is super popular. So Knight of Autumn just wrecks a lot of other strategies. And the fact that it's in the main deck, the fact that it's recurable, it's just like this massively powerful, repeatable 2-for-1, 3-for-1, 4-for-1. When you use the second mode of destroy target artifact or enchantment. The last ability, also extremely important. Modern can be super aggro. Burn can kill you really fast. So Knight of Autumn gaining 4 life, recur it, keep gaining 4 life, 4, 8, 12. It adds up really fast. And a strategy like Burn often can't keep up with that kind of recurring life gain. So I've loved Knight of Autumn from the beginning. I've cut it at points because I was frustrated that I didn't have enough blue cards. But particularly in the metagame right now, Knight of Autumn is sensational, and I think 2 is a pretty good spot to be at, similar to Blade Splicer. So that is those are the spells in the main deck. Again, Ephemerate, probably sort of I think Nassif called it the glue that holds the deck together. I'd go a step further and call it the single most important card in the deck. The most powerful card in the deck, the card that I want to see the most of every game. And then I guess touching on the mana base quickly, the Snow basics are only for Icefang Codal, but it's a strong synergy. We want to run basics anyway, so we might as well just run Snow basics and make Icefang Codal that much better. Since we're a 3-color deck, Prismatic Vista is excellent. It can grab the color that we're missing. Say we've got, green and blue, but no white. We get white, white and green, but no blue. We grab blue, etc. Prismatic Vista, very flexible. We got 3 of those. And then a bunch of fetches and some shocks. I found that green-white is the card that I want to play most on turn 1. And then turn 2, I'll get like a basic island so I can play Coiling Oracle or Icefang Codal. So I've got a couple Temple Gardens and then a single Breeding Pool and a single Hallowed Fountain. The mana base has actually run really, really smoothly. When we can get a Noble Hierarch out on turn 2, the fact that it makes all the Bant colors is frankly pretty broken. It just makes your mana work so much better because imagine that you just have like a Temple Garden and basic plains, but no blue. Noble Hierarch makes blue. Pretty convenient. If you have Breeding Pool and Forest, but no white, Noble Hierarch makes white. So Hierarch, really important, not just to ramp us, but to sort of fix our early game mana as well. Should not underestimate the Exalted ability either. Yeah, so Hierarch, some people still argue that it's not really correct in the deck, that we should run other cards, but I've been extremely impressed. I'm pretty sure Gabriel Nassif is convinced at this point with Noble Hierarch. And yeah, sequencing your lands, very important. You got to pay a lot of attention, like what you want to play on turn 3. Like if Eternal Witness is going to be really important, make sure that you've got that double green. If Force of Negation is really important, make sure you've got that double blue. You guys get the point, but Merfolk players were used to mono blue lands, and I feel like when I have been unable to cast the spells that I want on time, it's been because of my own personal errors, not because the mono base couldn't support casting those spells. I just needed to have better sequencing. So I love that there's room to grow, room to learn with this deck. It's just been so much fun. Quickly looking at the sideboard here, Celestial Purge, really excellent against a deck like Jund, where you're playing against Lilianas or Bloodbraids. Celestial Purge can exile any of those things. Yeah, just, Death Shadow, Gurmag Angler. Let's see. Exiling Eidolon of the Great Revel is extremely important, because that card can really hurt us since all of our spells cost 3 or less. Quite good. Quite happy with 2 of them. Let's skip Worship for a second. 2 Ceremonious Rejections. Quite strong against Tron, which can be a tricky matchup. And hits Walking Ballista. Very important, since all of our X1, our 1 toughness creatures get wrecked by Walking Ballista. We want more ways to answer a card like that. And remember that any of these cards we can recur with Eternal Witness. So running 2 of them, we're really running effectively more than that with 3 Eternal Witnesses in the deck. Moving on, Collector Oof, another way to answer something like Walking Ballista, but just hoses artifact decks in general. It's a creature, we can save it, we can blink it with Ephemerate in response to removal. Heroic Intervention is a new addition for me. I've noticed that one of the ways that I lose the easiest is against board wipes, like an Anger the Gods, Supreme Verdict. If you play Heroic Intervention, your creatures gain Indestructible. You get to untap, attack, start blinking again, potentially draw counter spells. So I've already had some success with Heroic Intervention. Pretty happy with it. Weather the Storm is another Modern Horizons card, and it is wildly powerful against a lot of strategies. Against Storm, if they play Grape Shot, they're hitting you for 1 with each of their Grape Shot triggers, but you're gaining 3 life for every spell that they've cast. So you're outpacing Grape Shot at a 3-to-1 rate. If a Burn opponent or a Prowess opponent, they cast 2 or 3 spells, and then you cast the 4th spell, Weather the Storm. So 3 spells cast before it, 4 total. Here you're going to gain 12 life. So gaining 12 life against a Prowess deck, against a Burn deck, is just backbreaking. I bring this in also sometimes against just like other creature strategies like Stoneforge Mystic, where it's like an attrition thing. I get like a million lands out, and then I can cast, Eternal Witness, Icefang Coatl, draw a Coiling Oracle, path something, blink Eternal Witness, get back Ephemerate Eternal Witness, get back path something, and then cast Weather the Storm and gain 18 life. So just a good card. It's quite strong, and I'm testing so much stuff, but this has been doing a great job. Force of Vigor, similarly, an all-star in the sideboard. We've got 2 Night of Autumns, the Collector Oofs, Ceremonious Rejection, and 2 Force of Vigor. So we're really quite strong against artifact strategies, which are very popular right now. Yeah, Force of Vigor. Your opponent gets a Batter Skull onto the battlefield, and you destroy it for free, and then you get Eternal Witness on the battlefield, get back your Force of Vigor, keep blowing up their artifacts. It can be pretty gross. Nissa, everything in this sideboard is basically being experimented with at this point, but Nissa is really kind of captivating, kind of extremely interesting option for us. This card's going to be its best against slow control strategies. You can play it on turn 3 with X = 1, activate her +2 to scry. So now she's got 3 counters on her. Next turn, you can just do her 0. All of our creatures in the deck are 3 drops or lower, so if we hit a creature, it goes straight to the battlefield. So Nissa can potentially be huge card advantage every single turn, and not just card advantage, but tempo advantage. Since we don't have to pay to get those creatures onto the battlefield, Nissa just puts it straight onto the battlefield. Lands also go straight to the battlefield. Let me check this. If it's a land card or a creature card, you put it onto the battlefield. It doesn't enter tapped. So you're ramping, you're playing creatures. The only thing that's kind of a whiff with Nissa are our non-creature spells. So Ephemerate, Path to Exile, Remand, Force of Negation. There's quite a few of them that can be hit and sort of whiff, but also a ton of creatures, a ton of lands. Nissa can get a lot of card advantage early on against a control deck. Alternatively, you can just keep ticking her up, and then her -6 just makes 2 5/5 flying creatures out of your lands. So there are definitely matchups where Nissa is pretty poor. Anytime that opponents can deal very easily with tokens like Eldrazi Displacer, Nissa's ultimate is going to be terrible because it'll just blink your 5/5 tokens, won't do anything. But slow matchups, potentially grindy matchups where you're going to turn 10, where you're hitting 8 land drops, 10, 12 land drops. Nissa can be really, really crazy if you just tap out and play her and do her ultimate. So I'm running with 1 right now. She's a bit of a combo with Worship, where Worship drags out games and then can finish them off with Nissa as a huge finisher. So getting back to Worship over here, I feel like this card shores up one of the fundamental weaknesses of this deck, which again is to sort of fast aggro decks. If we can just remand some stuff, chump with Coiling Oracle, blink with Ephemerate, do whatever we need to do, get to turn 4, slam a Worship. I have saved otherwise completely lost games against aggro decks with Worship. If the opponent was going to untap, maybe I'm at 2 life, they're going to attack for 17 or something. Worship just says to them, like, can you kill all my creatures? If you can't, you're not winning the game anytime soon. And for this kind of a deck, that is amazing. It's just super duper next level powerful. Sort of like Ephemerate, like that next level where it's almost approaching the power level of like Ancestral Recall. It's that strong. Worship in this deck is that strong. If an opponent can't kill all of our creatures, they're not going to win the game. Even against Storm, if they Grape Shot and they ping all of our creatures and then do the rest to our face, and they've stacked it all correctly, where our creatures will die first and then the rest of them will go to our face, we can just, for example, cast a Force of Negation or even a Remand on one of the copies that targets. Imagine they do one Grape Shot, one Grape Shot, one Grape Shot, one Grape Shot. We just counter one of those so that the Coiling Oracle lives. Now, all the rest of the Grape Shot triggers that were thrown at our face will just take us down to 1 life. We still got a creature, Worship is still doing its job, and we're not losing. So I found it really strong against aggro decks, really strong against Storm decks, which can be tricky. And it's just like it throws a wrench into the works with a lot of creature-based decks. You get kind of board stalls. There's no way they're going to kill all your creatures, and if they don't have some kind of evasion, and even if they do have evasion, it doesn't matter with Worship, right? Because they can keep attacking you. It doesn't do anything. What matters is, if we have evasion with Icefang Kotal, we can get in for 1 each turn, potentially more if we've got Hierarchs on the battlefield, or just go wider and wider if we keep blinking Blade Splicers. Whatever we need to do, Worship gives us time to get there. So I have felt some people play Stonehorn Dignitary, and that was a card that I didn't know about until this deck started getting popular. It's really interesting. When it enters the battlefield, the target opponent skips their next combat phase. So if you're playing against aggro, this is pretty strong because you play it, they lose their combat step, and then you can keep blinking it with Soulherder. It's a pretty sick combo, but at the same time, the opponent can just kill this guy, and that's sort of the end of our fun. Worship, a little bit harder for people to kill. People don't really play enchantment removal in their main deck. If they play it in their sideboard, there's probably like maybe 2 spells, 3 spells that can kill enchantments, whereas decks play lots and lots of ways to kill creatures. So I feel much more comfortable with Worship than with Stonehorn Dignitary. So that's why I'm running it. And that pretty much rounds out the deck. The main deck, the sideboard, it's a lot of blinking fun. You're going to have to make a lot of difficult decisions, like on turn 3, should you play a Coiling Oracle and hold up Ephemerate, or should you just slam Soulherder? Maybe you need to destroy an artifact with Night of Autumn. What's the best choice? The people who are going to be rewarded most playing this deck are the ones who know the format the best. If you're playing against Urza and you know that getting a critical density of artifacts is the most important thing for them, get that night out early as possible and start blowing up their artifacts. If it's a deck where you're gonna have some time, go ahead, play a Coiling Oracle, cast Ephemerate, start generating that early card advantage, that sort of raw card density. If you know your matchups, this deck is going to give you the tools to sort of get where you need to go. So without any more on the deck tech, let's go ahead and jump into sort of a sample match, show you guys a little bit about how the deck works in action. All right, so I'm here for game 1 of this sort of demo replay. So opening hand, this is a snap keep for me. We're looking in our opening hands for 2 or 3 lands. 4 lands can be okay depending on the spells. But really the most important piece is a 2-drop to start generating value. You love to see at least a single Ephemerate. Having 2 here is fantastic. Again, it's protection from removal, and it's also generating value with our ETB effects. And then we've got an engine card with Soulherder. So a definite keep. We've got access to all of our colors with our lands. So opponent opens with Bloodstained Mire. I was a little bit worried that they were going to cast Hand Disruption, Inquisition, or Thoughtseize, in which case they could take away our Coiling Oracle, and looking at this hand, that would set us back significantly, because that's really the card that's going to generate all of our value here. So we drew another land. That's not great, but we'll play the Hallowed Fountain tapped here with the plan of playing the basic forest next turn. All right, so Overgrown Tomb with Bloodstained Mire looks like Jund. Blackleaf Cliffs, a fast land. The opponent plays Wrenn and 6. Now, this is a card that can be quite difficult for Soulherder to beat, primarily because of its second ability. It's -1, deals 1 damage to any target, and if you check out our creatures, we've got a 1/1, and over here we've got another 1/1. So Wrenn and 6 really good against this deck. And they get to start generating their own card advantage. They got back the land from the graveyard. And we drew another land. Not great. So clearly running out Coiling Oracle with Wrenn and 6 on the board would be poor. It would just die right away. So my plan was to play another land and then wait until my next turn to play Coiling Oracle, potentially blink it with Ephemerate in response to Wrenn and 6. So let's go ahead and get this other shock land down on the battlefield, save as much life as possible. There's that Bloodstained Mire again. Opponent cracks it, gets, let's see, a tapped Stomping Grounds. They're going to get back the Bloodstained Mire. Now note that Wrenn and 6 is rapidly ticking up towards its ultimate, which is pretty powerful, especially for a 2-mana, a 2 casting cost Planeswalker. All instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard have Retrace, so any lands that they draw can get turned into Assassin's Trophies or Lightning Bolts or Maelstrom Pulses. So let's see if they've got a 2-drop. And they do. Here's sort of a promo Tarmogoyf. Path to Exile is nice, but that's not the play this turn, at least not yet. We're going to now finally get this Coiling Oracle onto the battlefield. Let's see what we hit. Top card is a Force of Negation. Remember, as I mentioned, it does reveal it to the opponent, so the opponent does know now that I have the Force in hand. I'm still happy to have it. So Nurturing Peatland is a very, very strong combo with a Wrenn and 6 because it lets them draw an extra card every turn. They went ahead and cycled it right now. They're going to go ahead and take up Wrenn and 6 again to get back the Peatland. And Renin 6 is just one loyalty away from being able to ultimate. They probably feel pretty comfortable sitting behind this Tarmogoyf. And the opponent is going to pass. Now, I have the option of blinking my Coiling Oracle, but if they respond with removal, which with 8 cards in hand, they could almost certainly do that. Actually, pretty curious why they didn't go to kill the Coiling Oracle this turn. They clearly don't feel that it's a threat in any way. But still, if I went for Ephemerate and they bolt it, it just sets me back a massive amount. This is my value piece. With the value piece on the board, I need to get down an engine piece. Next turn, I'll have 4 lands. I'll be able to still hold up Ephemerate while getting Soulherder on the battlefield. Opponent has 8 cards they're forced to discard. They pitch a land. Knight of Autumn is interesting, but not really at its best against Jund. Gaining life could be significant. If I need a big creature, Knight of Autumn can do that too. But I'd really rather have something like an Eternal Witness in this matchup. So I'm going to go ahead and crack that Flooded Strand. At this point, I can get a basic because, my mana seems pretty good. I might want to turn on Death Touch with Icefang Kotal, so save some life, get some snow basics onto the battlefield, and let's just jam Soulherder, see if the opponent tries to remove it, in which case we would have to blink it with Ephemerate. Alright, so the opponent let me go to my end step, so I do get the trigger on Coiling Oracle. And it looks like the opponent is realizing that they want to remove Soulherder. Now, they should have done Assassin's Trophy on my second main phase, because then I wouldn't get the trigger to blink the Coiling Oracle. And this whole situation is just kind of instructive, educational, not just on the timing of removal against Soulherder decks, but also just on the dynamics of how Soulherder triggers work. So here, we're targeting Coiling Oracle. Opponent is trying to kill the Soulherder. I am going to save the Soulherder with Ephemerate. It's going to get blinked. And so it gets a trigger whenever a creature is exiled, but it was itself that got exiled. Right? So when it enters, it doesn't get that trigger because it doesn't apply to the current Soulherder, because the old Soulherder went away, got exiled. So Assassin's Trophy gets countered because its target went away. Now, finally, this original trigger is going to resolve. It's going to blink the Coiling Oracle. I get 2 triggers. I always just put the Soulherder trigger on the stack first so that the Coiling Oracle trigger will resolve first. You can see I got a land straight onto the battlefield, which is pretty sweet, because now I can get another land to continue holding up Ephemerate if the opponent tries to ping Coiling Oracle with Renin 6 or just tries to remove the Soulherder. I can blink it and save it again. Coiling Oracle doing a great job ramping my lands. And now Soulherder is going to grow, so my engine piece will get... So I just chose to get an untapped Temple Garden right away. I had no more basic basic planes to fetch. I only have 1 of them. So I wanted to make sure that there were going to be no tricks that the opponent could do in response to cracking a fetch. Get the white mana available now. Let the Soulherder trigger resolve. It's a 2/2. It's resistant to Renin 6. And opponent plays a Dark Confidant. So Path is nice to have in hand here. Opponent plays that Bloodstained Mire for, I believe, the 3rd time. Tapped Blood Crypt. Gets back to Bloodstained Mire, and Renin 6 is getting ready to ultimate. You can see the only instant or sorcery they have in their graveyard currently is Assassin's Trophy, but with 6 cards in hand and a Dark Confidant on the table, they could easily get plenty of instants and sorceries into the graveyard. Opponent clearly wants to save their Renin 6, allow it to ultimate, so they didn't attack with the Tarmogoyf. I'm going to go ahead and take the risk here of pathing... Wait, what's happening here? No, it looks like I went ahead and blinked the Coiling Oracle. I could save the path for my turn on Dark Confidant because they don't get the trigger until their turn anyway. So I went shields down there for a second. If they had a path, a Fatal Push, they could have killed either Soulherder or Coiling Oracle in response to that Ephemerate. but I wanted to take the window of opportunity. So you're going to see the value that Ephemerate can generate here. At the beginning of your upkeep, 2 triggers go on the stack. They're not being cast yet. So you're going to let 1 rebound trigger resolve. You're going to target that Coiling Oracle. Soulherder is going to get bigger. Coiling Oracle triggers again. Drew an Eternal Witness. That's pretty amazing. Soulherder gets bigger. Then you let the second rebound trigger resolve. You can target the same creature, Coiling Oracle. Soulherder will grow again. Drew a remand. Again, pretty amazing. And we've got a 5/5 Soulherder on the table. And if you compare our hand, we've got 7 cards to the opponent's 6. We've got 6 cards to their 6 lands to their 4 lands. A 5/5 to their 2/3 and their 2/1. As a Merfolk pilot, this kind of value against Jund is pretty satisfying. We've got a ton of options here, but looping Ephemerate with Eternal Witness seems like a great option. It's, as I mentioned many times now, Ephemerate is the most powerful card in the deck, and being able to get that back and start recurring it is just a way to pull way ahead in this match. The opponent did not respond with a Fatal Push, so I'm pretty sure they don't have it. So go ahead, play my land. I'm actually going to attack Renin 6 with Soulherder. There's no way they can kill it. They go ahead and chump with Tarmogoyf. So they're really committed to this ultimate plan here. All right, so here comes Eternal Witness. If there's an Ephemerate to get, you pretty much always want to get that. Going to go ahead and Ephemerate the Eternal Witness right away. Soulherder will grow to a 6/6. I'm going to get back the other Ephemerate. Going to crack this land, get another untapped Temple Garden for more white. Going to path the Dark Confidant, of course, because it's exiled. Soulherder grows bigger still. And on my end step, I'm going to blink the Eternal Witness with Soulherder. Soulherder grows again. And I get back my path to exile. So I go into the opponent's turn with Ephemerate or Path up and Remand and Force of Negation up. They're going to get to Ultimate Renin 6, but again, they only have an Assassin's Trophy currently. And remember, extremely important, that Force of Negation, when it counters something, it exiles the spell. So even though the opponent's going to have access to retraceable instants and sorceries, they're not going to be able to get a ton of value casting them 1,000 times because I'm going to exile them with Force of Negation. All right, so opponent passes, and knowing that they have access now to a retraceable Assassin's Trophy, it would have been incorrect to tap out my only white source to try to blink one of my creatures, because in response they could just kill the Soulherder and I wouldn't be able to save it. So we get a rebounded Ephemerate on my upkeep. We are going to target Coiling Oracle. I could have targeted Eternal Witness. We've got a lot of stuff in our hand right now. It doesn't really matter since we have another Ephemerate, but again, I think it might have been correct just to go for Ephemerate. And, you know, drawing a land, at this point, it doesn't really matter what we draw too much. I am going to get in with my 2 creatures. Opponent is going to retrace Assassin's Trophy, pitching the Peatland. So I am going to immediately force this, which will exile it. Opponent doesn't seem to have more removal, so they're going to take 11, go all the way down to 6. I'm going to Ephemerate the Eternal Witness, and Soulherder is going to grow again. Eternal Witness is going to try to get back Force of Negation. And yeah, I cracked the Misty Rainforest, get an island, crack. So I was trying to crack and get two islands to be able to hardcast Force of Negation. Opponent is responding with a Lightning Bolt, which is a little bit scary because it can get retraced. So I go down to 8. So they're going to retrace again, pitching another Peatland. They're going to retrace again, pitching a Bloodstained Mire. So I go down to 2, but the opponent's tapped out. I get my second blue source, and yeah, go to the end step. Blink Eternal Witness. Soulherder grows. It's now an 11/11. We're going to get back another Ephemerate and pass to the opponent. So they go for Thoughtseize, which is obviously pretty clever. It's correct sequencing because if they can get the Force of Negation out of my hand, then I won't be able to exile or counter even their Lightning Bolt. But I've got some tricks up my sleeve. I'm going to Force of Negation the Thoughtseize. So that gets exiled. The opponent is going to retrace the Lightning Bolt. And in response to this, I'm going to Ephemerate the Eternal Witness to get back the Force of Negation. I've got a blue spell in hand. So Eternal Witness gets back the Force. Opponent doesn't have removal or another bolt in hand. So go ahead and force the Lightning Bolt. That's going to get countered. Exiled. And the opponent follows up with a Maelstrom Pulse on Soulherder. Nothing I can do about that, but I'm going to have 2 Ephemerate triggers here. I get back the first Ephemerate, get back the second Ephemerate, drew a Force of Negation, swing for 1, opponent goes down to 5. Ephemerate the Eternal Witness, get back Force of Negation number 2. Ephemerate the Eternal Witness again, get back Soulherder. Play the Soulherder. Play a Knight of Autumn, gain 4 life. Go to my end step, blink the Knight of Autumn, gain another 4 life. I'm up to 10, and the opponent couldn't take it anymore. This was a really, really fun game. I don't think I had seen Renin 6 Ultimate before, but you can see from turn 2, the opponent was kind of all in on the plan of ultimating Renin 6. It could have been amazing. It could have won them the game if I didn't have the Force of Negation to keep looping, but really showing the power of the fact that Force of Negation exiles spells when it counters them. So that was really fun. Extremely strong Soulherder game 1 against Jund. Let's go ahead to game 2, see how that went. All right, I'm back for game 2. The opponent's going to be on the play here. And this is definitely keepable. You guys probably know against mid-range decks, you don't really want to mulligan if you can avoid it, because it's pretty much just a battle for resources. So the opponent kept 7. They play a Bloodstained Mire, and again, do not have the turn 1 discard. Soulherder is pretty great. Best draw there probably would have been Noble Hierarch, so we can ramp out like a Blade Splicer on turn 2. But as it went, just have a bunch of 3-drops, have a Celestial Purge, which is nice against a lot of their cards. All right, so slow start from the opponent. We like to see it since we've got a slow start ourselves. Go ahead and get a tap Temple Garden. Play the Flooded Strand and passed. So it looks like they're cruising to a 3-drop, probably Liliana the Veil. And there it is. They're going to get me to discard something, which is sort of fine. I think I'll pitch the Temple Garden. Since I've already got a Temple Garden on the battlefield, on their end step, I'm going to go ahead, get an untapped Breeding Pool, pay 2 life, and then I get to Celestial Purge Liliana the Veil. That's pretty sick, being able to answer their 3-drop Planeswalker on my empty board with my 2-drop Exile spell. All right, so now we get to get a Blade Splicer down. And if it lives and we get a Soulherder down, it's not going to live. Opponent's going to bolt it, but we've still got our 3/3 creature on the battlefield. And you get in with the Golem, and I think the correct play here, well, let's see. There's a couple of possibilities. If I had an Ephemerate in hand, I would definitely play another Blade Splicer with the intention of following it up with Soulherder. But here, seems like Nissa might be a good choice. Enters a battlefield with 2, can take up to 4 right away. At the very least, gets to scry 2. I've got kind of an awkward hand, so setting up the next few draws seems reasonable. All right, opponent responds with an Abrupt Decay, and that's sort of fine. We can't counter that or anything. So I liked both of these cards. The opponent is going to get down a threat eventually, so Path to Exile is going to be decent. I put Path and then Heroic Intervention on top of it. I'm going to want a way to protect this Soulherder. Next turn, I'm going to have 3 mana for Soulherder, or no, actually Blade Splicer first, probably, and Heroic Intervention to just protect my board. All right, opponent's got a Scavenging Ooze, but they're missing land drops here. All right, so I started playing Soulherder, realized I want to play Blade Splicer first. Now the Golem has first strike if the opponent eats a creature from the graveyard. In this case, I've got a Blade Splicer in there. He could have traded with the Golem if he wanted. Now I've got first strike, so it's just not really not a trade for him anymore. All right, opponent takes 3, and let's see, trying to bolt the Blade Splicer. Now that's an important value piece here in my development. Opponent's only got 1 red mana. I'm gonna go ahead and try to effectively counter this with Heroic Intervention. It resolves. Opponent doesn't seem to have more removal in response, and that Ephemerate was probably the best top deck at this point. So I'm going to go to combat before I do anything else. Attack with both of these guys now. There's still only 1 creature in the graveyard, if I understand correctly. So Scavenging Ooze can only grow to a 3/3, so it's not really threatening. They could have a Fatal Push for Blade Splicer, but they can't kill the Blade Splicer because none of their permanents have left the battlefield, so Revolt doesn't work with Fatal Push. So they can't, for example, eat something from the graveyard, grow to a 3/3, get rid of first strike, and trade with a Golem. So they just push a Golem, which is sort of fine by me. Take 3, go down to 7, and we get to follow up with our engine card. Here's the Soulherder, and we've got protection with Ephemerate. I'm going to blink that Blade Splicer, hope the opponent doesn't have any removal, and we start accumulating tokens. All right, opponent's just going to eat that Blade Splicer in the graveyard. Awkward mana, tapped Raging Ravine. Maybe they have like a Bloodbraid Elf in hand that they really want to cast. Here's a Plague Engineer. Not extremely strong in this spot. The best that it can do, as far as I understand, is to kill the Blade Splicer. If they kill the Blade Splicer, I've no longer got first strike. He can trade with a Scavenging Ooze, maybe trade with a Soulherder if I attack, and then only take 3. Sort of try to stabilize. If he names Golem, then these guys would be 2/2s. Scavenging Ooze is suddenly a good blocker. They would still have first strike, so Plague Engineer is not a great blocker. So let's see, if they name these guys, I would attack. He'd take 3, still stabilizing, but this Ephemerate is going to kind of push it over the edge here. If I blink the Blade Splicer, it grows the Soulherder, making it harder for Plague Engineer to get profitable blocks. Soulherder is going to be a 3/3. I'm going to make another 3/3. If he names Golems at this point, they become 2/2s. I attack. He blocks the 3/3 Soulherder. Blocks a 2/2. Is taking. Oh, I'm going to get another 3/3. So basically another 2/2 effectively if he names Golem. So block 3, block 2, take 5. I guess he could have decent blocks here. Let's go through that one more time. If I make another Golem, he names Golem with Plague Engineer, then I'd have 3 2/2s and a 3/3 Soulherder. So he could block the Soulherder with Scavenging Ooze and trade. He could block one of the Golems with Plague Engineer. First strike would kill the Plague Engineer. He would take 5. All my creatures would get bigger again. He'd have an empty board. So in this spot, the opponent decided to scoop. So a much quicker game than game 1. We saw the power of Blade Splicer in combination with the extremely powerful Ephemerate. And yeah, just Soulherder also sort of helping us along, blinking the Blade Splicer, generating another token. And the Jund opponent with 7 cards couldn't keep up. So my experience so far has been that Soulherder does quite well against grindy mid-range decks as long as we play correctly. Hand disruption can be quite difficult to overcome, because if we've got like a 2-drop that we're really leaning hard on to draw cards and generate value, and they take that out of our hand, we can do nothing on turn 2. Soulherder doesn't really do anything by itself. So yeah, that's really the biggest speed bump against these kinds of decks, is if they hit us with hand disruption early and we don't have any redundant pieces. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's not Merfolk content, but I just have been loving this deck so much that it just feels natural for me to start making some content for this deck as well. Please leave your thoughts down below. Let me know if you've played against this deck or if you've even been trying it yourself. I'll try to upload a league sometime soon with the deck. See if I can do well in a 5-match league. And yeah, it's good to be back. Looking forward to uploading more videos. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.